This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you. All right, so I inadvertently forgot to send out the minutes because I was so worried about getting the other attachments out. So my apologies to everybody. I just remembered that today. So we can table those since they just went out and approve them at the next meeting. All right, sorry, just moving stuff around on my screen. So Debbie, DOH enforcement list.
Well, the state has been very busy. And please remember, we haven't met since June, so there are quite a few of them. First one is dated October 25th. Center for Allied Health Education in Brooklyn, New York. Assessed a civil penalty of $2,000 for violations of 10 NYCR 63.3D. Dated June 17th, Mountaindale Fire Department First Aid Squad in Mountaindale, New York. Assessed a civil penalty of $2,000, suspended for 1 year, effective 6/14. The suspension is stayed for violations of Public Health Law, Article 30, 3012B, 306, and 10 NYCR Part 800.21. James Philpin from Staten Island, revoked effective 7/22, assessed a civil penalty of $10,000 for Part 800.3 AP1 and 800.3 AL. Francesco Berardi from Staten Island, New York, suspended for 1 year, effective 8/3/21. The suspension is stayed pending no further violations for a period of 3 years. Assessed a civil penalty of $2,000 for violations of 10 NYCR Part 800.3 AP. Yosef Ben Simone from Long Island City, suspended for 3 years, effective 8/5/21. The suspension is stayed. Placed on probation for 3 years, effective 8/5/21. Assessed a civil penalty of $2,000 for violations of 10 NYCR 800.16A2 and 800.16A9. Kevin Steiger from Beacon, New York, surrendered effective 8/24/21 for violations of 10 NYCR Part 800.16A11. Will Davis from Astoria, New York, issued a reprimand 9/2, placed on probation for 3 years, effective 9/2, assessed a civil penalty of $2,000. Half is suspended pending no further violations. 10 NYCR Part 800.3 AO. Thomas Warrington from Blue Mountain Lake, revoked effective 9/13/21. Assessed a civil penalty of $2,000. $1,000 is suspended pending compliance to payment. Violations of 10 NYCR 800.15A3 and 800.16A1. Eric Geisler from Scotia, New York, suspended for 1 year, effective 9/16. The suspension is stayed pending no further violations for 3 years. Assessed a civil penalty of $2,000 for violations of 10 NYCR Part 800.16A5. Timothy Leach from Blue Mountain Lake, suspended for 3 years, effective 9/17/21. The suspension is stayed pending compliance with probation. Placed on probation for 3 years, effective 9/17/21. Assessed a civil penalty of $2,000. $1,500 is stayed pending compliance with stipulation and order. 10 NYCR 800.16A2 and 9. Christopher Howland from Amsterdam, New York, suspended for 1 year, effective 10/18. The suspension is stayed pending no further violations for 3 years. Assessed a civil penalty of $2,000. 10 NYCR Part 800.16A5. Kevin McKeon from Lynbrook, New York, suspended for 1 year, effective 10/22/21. The suspension is stayed, placed on probation for 3 years, effective 10/22/21. Assessed a civil penalty of $2,000 for violations of 10 NYCR Part 800.3 AM and 800.16A11. Giovanni Garvia from Flushing, New York, revoked effective 10/22/21. Assessed a civil penalty of $2,000, 10 NYCR 800.16A4. Nassau County Police Department in Mineola, New York, issued a formal reprimand effective 6/14/21. Assessed a civil penalty of $2,000 for violation of public health law, Article 33,006 AC, 3053, and 10 NYCR Part 800.21. James Schofield from New Paltz, New York. Certification has been suspended for 6 months, effective 6/9/21. The suspension is stayed, placed on probation for 3 years, effective 6/9/21. Required to take an ACLS refresher for violations of 10 NYCR Part 800.15A1 and 2. And the last one, Richard Harold Jr. from Manasquan, New Jersey, issued reprimand, assessed a civil penalty of $2,000, $1,000 stayed, placed on probation for 3 years, effective 6/10/21, for violations of 10 NYCR Part 800.3A0. That is all of them.
Thank you. Any questions for Debbie? They have definitely been busy.
A new revenue source.
All right, moving on. Any correspondence has been sent to you via email. So we'll move on to old business. And I see Mark Beavers was able to hop on. Are you set to give the report, or do you need me to?
I am set to give the report.
Okay.
And I will keep this relatively brief. We met 2 weeks ago in Albany in a hybrid meeting for CMAC and SEMSCO. Fair amount of stuff that's looks like it's starting to move forward. Obviously, the department continues to say that there's been a lot of challenges and some COVID struggles because of reassignment of staff. And they also have a handful of retirements coming up. One of the big things they're working on is taking a look at quality metrics. They have put out 8 KPIs that I've discussed in the past that they're going to be pulling data on. The trauma system is looking for, the state's looking to get more involved in the trauma system, and they're starting to pull data on transport of pediatric trauma patients to pediatric trauma centers that in a lot of cases, or at least in a lot of parts of the region, are not really applicable to us. The other big one they're looking at is transporting of trauma patients to non-trauma centers, which has been an ongoing struggle in this area, is getting all trauma patients or patients who meet trauma criteria to trauma centers. There are some new protocols or some protocol changes that will be coming soon. It appears that they are working on the education pieces and the protocol updates for them. They're still working on state disaster protocols that can be turned on and off by region. And so basically, if there's a pandemic outbreak in the North Country that's not applicable to the rest of the state, Dr. Delaney could turn those protocols on. They were discussing Suboxone in ambulances and adding that to the formulary for future use if needed. And fluid administration in burn patients and pressor use are 2 other data points they're looking at. They are really pushing the consensus formula for burn fluid administration and going away from the Parkland formula. The Bureau of EMS is running the state's Surgeon Flex Center, which manages hospital diversions. what they found is that most hospital CEOs had no idea that their hospital was actually on diversion. So the Surgeon Flex Center requires the CEO or designee to put in a request for it. They're allowing diversions that are state approved to go to 2 to 4 hour increments. Syracuse seems to be the kind of champion of diversions in this area, or across the state, I'm sorry. They are also seeing some significant increase in Rochester and Buffalo and Albany areas for wait times. And the idea is that they can work with other hospitals to kind of spread the surge out so that there's all the hospitals don't go on diversion at the same time, which creates some headaches. They're hiring some trauma program positions. There was an incredibly lengthy conversation at the CMAC amongst the docs about writing a letter to encourage vaccination of EMS providers. An incredibly lengthy conversation that it was actually failed because of the previous conversation, which is a massive workforce shortage. One of the big problems across the state and the country is an exodus from EMS. COVID has seemed to take in what most people thought was going to be over the next 5 years and really expedited the exodus out of the system for providers. The state of Texas, their director of EMS, they have about 70,000 EMS providers in the state. He ran a report to see how many times, or to see if how many providers appeared on at least one PCR for the entire year. In 19 and 20, they were in the mid 40% for providers appearing on at least one PCR. In 2021, they're at 27% of their 70,000 providers appearing on one PCR throughout the year. I would suspect that those numbers are pretty much the same across the entire New York State. The only other thing I would add, and I'll ask Jonathan to email it out to everybody if he hasn't, the state had Mike Benham something from downstate put together a kind of a white paper on the crisis in EMS across New York State. Every single point he makes is 100% spot on. It is a 10-page paper. I would really encourage you folks to all read the paper and really start working with your agencies and getting more involved with the agencies and your facilities. One of the big conversations is EMS and hospitals and healthcare. We're all in our own silos. And, at this point in time, we do need to work together, because one of the things that's been clearly stated, not only at this meeting, but in other meetings, is that the problem is going to get worse before it gets better. And that is the end of my report, unless there's any questions.
Does anybody have any questions for Mark? All right, and just to add in, I am a member of the State Quality Metrics Committee, so I am working with them. One of the first things that they're doing is rewriting the quality assurance manual to hopefully help providers be able to benchmark data better. Also, in my email, I'm receiving diversion notices from across the state. I receive multiple emails every 4 hours. At one point, I started to kind of send those out. And then I realized that for us up here, for the most part, with the exception of maybe, South Jeff, Henderson area towards Jefferson County, it didn't affect us as much because they were still open to burns and traumas, and the folks that we would be sending there or going from the field there. So I haven't been sending them out. Our local hospitals in Jefferson County, all of them have been fantastic at using the EM resource system, which all EMS has access to, as well as the hospitals. And Lewis County's been better about using it. And St. Lawrence County, I'm still struggling with getting hospitals to use EM resource, but it is a good communication tool. And the state has also entered into a contract with Juvari, the holders of EM resource, and eventually it will be required for everybody. They're just starting to build the system now. So any other questions for Mark? Okay. So RSI testing status, anything on that, Mark? I think
We have no new applications for RSI agencies, therefore we have no current need for testing.
that's easy. So protocols, those are the protocols that Mark kind of referred to. They were approved way back when by CMAC, but with a collaborative, CMAC and SEMSCO, and they've been awaiting the commissioner's approval for, I don't know, I lost track of time, maybe a year. Sounds like they have some new process that we're not aware of yet to be able to move these. So we're still watching for those. And, if you remember, those are the ones that talked about putting TXA on board the ambulances. Difficult airway. Do we have any updates on that, Debbie?
No, they're just waiting for us to schedule something. So I was hoping maybe we could look at doing that. I don't know if we want to wait until spring fling or if we want to try to do something this winter. So I'll work with the folks that are our designated instructors and see what they want to do.
Rsi committee. So this is a project that we've been working on, and we were actually able to pull some data. We found some issues with our data, which means we have another whole project committee on that. But as we went through the data, we didn't find as many issues as we initially thought we would. And I don't have my notes right handy here, but basically we pulled all charts that had Versed administrations. And then we looked at all charts that were that Versed was administered and that was for non-convulsions or seizure type activity. And we had only a handful of those. And for the most part, the Versed administration was appropriate, but we came up with Quality Corner, an idea to do a newsletter, which we're just trying to make pretty. We have the content, although we are going to look for some resources, and then it will be sent. We did meet with Dr. Gray and Dr. Delaney to look it over, so we'll want to have the physicians verify the information in it. But can you guys see my screen? So basically what we're looking at, and we'll do this with further data that we pull, is starting a Quality Corner newsletter. Our goal was to keep it short and sweet so people will actually maybe read it. And we'll be able to post it on the website as well as send it out, and then people can go back to it. We're working on the logo. I hate that black background, so that's got to be changed. But basically, there's going to be some key takeaways. Again, there was some missing documentation when we had to go back through and review charts. Agitated patients is kind of what we were looking at, and the concern was that they were getting 5 milligrams of IV instead of 2.5 milligrams. So we put that in there. And we also wanted to ensure that they are assessing them for hypoxia prior to administering Versed, and making sure that they remember to monitor them closely, and that if it is a seizure, the primary or secondary impression should be listed as seizure if applicable. Unfortunately, all our charting systems are different, so some go by ICD-9 codes, but we found quite a few charts in there that once we read them, the patient had a seizure either when they arrived or during transport, but it was not listed in the chart as a primary or secondary, resulting in us having to review them. Some of the charting systems, you have to document epilepsy. Some of them, you can document unspecified convulsions. They're all different with the EPCRs. And again, that's a different committee where we're kind of looking at that. But again, we reviewed the 5 milligram IV doses of non-seizures primary impression. So then moving on, we went through and threw some metrics in that, one of the things, some charts did a really good job of documenting their assessment and documenting any de-escalation techniques along with patient positioning and patient monitoring. So we just threw a little bit of information in here about each of these, and then some theory and evidence behind each of them. And once we get this completed, we will send it out for everybody's review. But again, now that, as we discussed in the past, now that all of our transporting agencies are electronic, we should be able to do some more quality projects like this. So Mark and Melissa did a great job helping with this, and so we're looking forward to doing more. So we're open for ideas if there's something that you want to see. This came off as a result of a concern of patients that were overly sedated and had to be intubated after arrival at the hospital. So any discussion, questions on this? We did identify a couple charts that we will be sending to the medical director just for further review, because we're not 100% sure why they went down the path they did. So questions, concerns? All right, so within the next couple of weeks, we should get this prettied up if it cooperates, and get this sent out for full review before it gets sent to agencies. All right. Let me see here. I gotta unshare. What's next? Our data committee. I'm just gonna talk about that real quick. I'm working with a group of folks that represent each EPCR documentation system within the region. And we are trying to create education and identify different ways that we can clean up the data. So we've had 3 meetings. We've developed 2 rough draft educational PowerPoints, and that's where we are there. And I'm trying to find my stop sharing here. Come on. Why can't I find my stop sharing option? There we go. Sorry. Any questions before I pull up the program agency report? Wow, you guys are a quiet group tonight. All right, I'm going to insert. Okay. Oh, hang on, it just covered up my view here. Sorry, I got to move my screens because I can't see the screen. And I lost my PowerPoint. All right, so I'm going to go really fast once I get this up and running again here. Through the RTAC and the RStack, they both did, or they did presentations again, just as additional presentations, I should say, regarding burn patients and tourniquet use. Okay. Now, this changing screens around isn't working well because now I got to find my share screen here again. Okay. There we go. Every time I click on something, a new screen, it covers up. So just run through this quick. The REMSCO did meet on October 25th, so I had both dates on the presentation. Here's the RTAC. We met on September 10th. Our next meeting will be December 10th. They've been virtual. They reviewed a couple of case studies. One was with tourniquet use and one was with a burn patient. So with tourniquet use, the key teaching points are there in the blue box. They actually had a patient that ended up not having a tourniquet put on, and it was, I think, over 4 hours before they arrived at upstate, and during the time that they were in the non-trauma center, the tourniquet was not taken down to check for bleeding, and I'm not sure, it did sound like it wasn't applied as tight as it should be, and the patient ended up with compartment syndrome and ended up having to have an amputation. So they just wanted to push to ensure that, you know, if we can direct pressure with wound packing, you know, again, if it's really bad, then the tourniquet for uncontrolled bleeding. The regional trauma center says apply the tourniquet as distal as possible, about 2 to 3 inches above the wound. Your pre-hospital trauma life support says place it high and tight. I listened for hours at a state EMS meeting about where it should be placed, and again, I think it's the clinical judgment of the provider. And as Mark said, the other was the burn patient with fluid resuscitation. And they're still seeing them come in hypothermic. And I think I have that presentation up here, so I'll skip on to that. Our stack, we met September 17th. Next meeting's December 17th. We reviewed the bylaws and reviewed the AHA Mission Lifeline Emergency Medical Stroke Routing, which is, we pretty much follow that now as it is, but they just did a review on it, and I was on a committee to revise those. We've met, we've made our revisions to be presented at the next one. Okay, so again, this was the tourniquet. I'm just going to skip through this. So this was the burn case. The patient had 40% TBSA. mix of full and partial thickness burns. Moist dressings were placed at a non-trauma receiving hospital. The patient had received 500 milliliters of normal saline by EMS and then another 100 milliliters at the non-trauma receiving center. They were transported by air to the trauma center, and basically the patient was over resuscitated with fluid, which caused increased capillary leak. They were hypothermic. It was a difficult resuscitation. So again, that was just the stuff that they talked about, was be careful about the amount of fluid that you give them prior to arrival at the trauma center, and make sure you're taking into account any fluid that was given by EMS as well. I threw this in here, the stroke video I talked about at the last meeting. We do have some monies left from that grant. We haven't had any further agencies submit to us, so we are reaching out to the AHA to see if we can do a second version of the video to push more stroke education. Samaritan Medical Center, been working with Michelle Mann there. We've been giving feedback to agencies. I did talk to her the other day, and it looks like she's going to start doing the feedback directly with the agencies. We're going to try and work with her to ensure that she has the right contacts for the agencies. And again, we had a month or so there missing, so she was going to work on sending that. These are agency renewals that we received. So St. Lawrence County, one in Lewis County, 3 in Jefferson County, and another one transport in St. Lawrence. So medical director changes. So Cranberry Lake Volunteer Fire Department has submitted all the paperwork and all the updated BLS adjunct paperwork to change to Dr. Delaney as their medical director. And then Madrid Rescue to Dr. Healy. Dr. Heiss was their medical director, and she is working on retiring. So I've been working with the agencies to help them find other physicians in St. Lawrence County to cover her agencies and the last statements there, because I presented it the other night. So I am going to ask if anybody has any objections to these, and if I hear no objections to these, I'm going to assume it's passed. Are there any objections to this change? Hearing none, we will send them information to, or we will send them the approval to change and update the state. So public access defibrillation, we received a few updates from these businesses. So we did receive all the paperwork for Calcium Fire Department to be approved for BLS Narcan. Does anybody have any objections to Calcium Fire Department being approved for BLS Narcan? Okay. All the paperwork is submitted. We'll consider that an approval if there are no objections or discussion. I just threw out a reminder that BLS skills are due annually by December 31st, as well as the process. If any agency providers have a question about the process that are on the meeting, please feel free to reach out to me or look at the credentialing manual. EPCRs, as we said, we're 100% electronic for all transporting agencies, and ALSF are first responders. Too many initials there. And we have been working diligently with our BLSFR agencies to get them on board. So there's a list of BLSFRs that we have successfully onboarded since our last meeting. And then we have a few that are in process with some go live dates. And we have some departments that are remaining. Anybody who has a star by their name under the remaining departments, they're enrolled in the New York State CME program, and this is why they have to go to electronic documentation. Is because the state put forth in their manual that came out last year that to remain in the program, they must be electronic by the end of this year. So we're going to be reaching out to some of those departments to see where they're at with going live. And the ones in bold, they've contacted our office, but we haven't submitted the paperwork for them to go. So we'll be following up with those guys. So the data integrity, as we talked about, it's consumed a huge portion of our time. We are in multiple committees. We have multiple phone calls with the state and the other program agency directors trying to get the data to be somewhere right. It's caused a lot of frustrations for our agencies. And so we're working with all of them to try and resolve all these issues. So CME Skill Sessions, we had some that have already gone by, and we have some upcoming ones that providers can go to. There should be a direct RSVP to that agency. And again, some of these are past since presented this on the 25th. So make sure that you're encouraging your providers, for those of you on the call that are with an agency. The end of June, we reviewed the status of those who didn't complete their CMEs. We had 24 providers that we non-credentialed. 7 of those were reinstated. 2 of them no longer have an ALS affiliation as required within the region, and 1 of them is no longer practicing. Clinically, they're doing administrative work only. Every 6 months, we end up cleaning up our database a lot, figuring out who's still in the area and who is no longer in the area. So Spring Fling, we are starting to work on that for next year, as well as we're working on a 2022 EMS Leadership Conference. We're going to do a hybrid. We're partnering with all the AHECs again this year, and a few EMS folks have joined the group. So we also have a call for speakers out, and I would ask if anybody on the REMAC is interested in speaking, please reach out to me, or they're interested in doing any of the core content that we normally do, please reach out to me via email, and we can work on all that when the Spring Fling Committee meets. So regional providers, I'm just going to see if I can bring up something else. I just kind of wanted to give you an idea on where we stood with the number of providers in our area. And in just a minute, I'm going to share another screen as soon as it comes up here. So about a year ago, I pulled data. So just about the same time. So you can see overall, our numbers haven't changed a lot. This data is pulled by the town in which they reside. Now, the problem with the data here, it looks like we have all kinds of folks out there, but what we're finding is that many of them hold their EMT card, but many do not practice. And you'll kind of see that with some survey results I'm going to run through. But basically, so this is Jefferson County in 2020 by each level of care, EMT, AEMT, critical care, and paramedic, for a total of 355 providers. They do have a few more in Jefferson County. This year in 2021, it's up to 369. Lewis has 72 providers altogether, and they have lost a few providers in 2021. One of the things with Lewis County too is there seems to be a few providers that run with agencies in that region, but they fall into this live outside the region category, so it's hard to quantify that. We've been working with Bob and Jen to send numbers over based on who's in their agencies. St. Lawrence County, again, their numbers are down more in 2021 for the total. And again, down here, these are the folks that have addresses that live outside of our region. So there's a couple more there that are registered and providing care in our region. So I just thought that I just wanted to give that snapshot to everybody as this ongoing discussion of the workforce shortage continues. So speaking of which, well, not yet. First, we did a COVID-19 vaccine survey. So we sent the survey out to 776 providers registered in our database. We received 308 responses. Again, this was as of 10/25, and the question was, are you vaccinated for COVID-19? 262 of them were vaccinated, where 46 were not. So that was good to see. But again, that's still only part of our providers. We asked them if they weren't vaccinated and if they were mandated by the government or the Department of Health, will they take the COVID-19 vaccine? They were pretty steadfast in saying no. So that would be a huge hit if they are active providers to our workforce, if that mandate comes through. And then we just ask about the booster shot, and then the majority of them said yes, they would take it, with 20% saying maybe and 11% absolutely not. So that's kind of where we stand with COVID vaccinations within the region. Then we did a quick workforce survey. I'm going to run through this really quick. We had actually a fairly good response to this. It was sent out to 46 agencies. We got 31 responses. As you can see, the majority of responders were all volunteer, followed by a hybrid that has both volunteer and paid providers, and then one agency with all paid providers. So we asked some questions, and again, going back to our concerns within the system, what percentage of your certified responders respond to over 50% of your agency's calls? And really that was under 10%. Where over 50% of the agencies, you don't have providers, or 25% of the agencies, you don't have providers responding to over 50% of their calls. So that was a little concerning. That was the volunteer agencies, and which is something that we know there's a few. We talked about the timely EMS responses in the community and whether they thought it was impaired by certified volunteer staff shortages. And they feel that your hybrid folks, you know, there's a few that didn't think it was impaired, but for the most case, all of them did. So we did have a few agencies where their membership increased, but there was a lot that decreased as well. Kind of giving you a snapshot. And if you want any of this information, I can send this to you. Yeah, we ask if the hybrid and fully paid agencies had increased the number of paid overtime hours, and there were some that have. And then have you had to increase the number of paid providers to cover times when volunteers are not available? Again, a lot of them said yes. So this kind of shows you if they're relying on mutual aid to cover calls. And again, you can kind of see how much the mutual aid system is being utilized. Again, 35% always rely on it because they have one ambulance if there's a second call. And then the remaining, this whole area here, other than this little never spot, really is reliant on some mutual aid for second or third calls. So this is what was a huge concern right here. And we asked the question, where are you losing providers to? And it was alarming that almost 30% turned out to be burnout. So that's a huge concern. And then this was the other big concern, is that there was a large number that considered their agency's EMS, or excuse me. Yeah. So the satisfactory was 56, distress was 28. It's the next one. This one, sorry, I was thinking about, is when you, the outlook or the future, that the majority of our agencies, 56% of them that answered say there's an unfavorable for agencies for them to be able to continue to adequately serve their community. So an unfavorable outlook on their ability to be able to serve the community. That was kind of scary. All right, so EM resource, I've already talked about that. Again, this, you guys have seen this before. This is the Pediatric Emergency Care Coordinators. Again, trying to promote pediatric emergency care. These are the agencies we currently have signed up with a Pediatric Emergency Care Coordinator. Please encourage folks you see or your agencies to sign up if they're not on this list. And basically, it just means that somebody in their agency is a champion for the treatment of pediatric patients and will help spread information within the agency regarding treatment. They don't need to be an expert pediatric provider. Again, with the end of the year coming up, the narcotic forms that agencies will have to do are not on the Bureau of EMS website, but hiding on the Department of Narcotics website. So we had sent a reminder out earlier this year on that. Fort Drum Regional Health Planning Organization has become a testing center to help with the gap in the ability for EMTs to get their tests completed, as all EMT testing is computer-based now. They no longer do paper tests. There is a Muru app out there which has, Bob, I did see that. I will check on that. So my apologies if we didn't get you on the list. So I'll have Jonathan check on that. Sorry, Bob Bowman just sent me a chat. We sent out a survey on this app as we're looking forward to how we're going to move forward with the protocol apps that we have. These are just some things that I've done, some training that we attended, and the Vital Signs Conference is coming up. Any questions? Did my share screen go away? Okay. All right. That's the program agency report. I apologize for the length of it, but we've been really busy kind of looking at the system and what's going on. Afraid for the future. So anybody have anything else to add? All right, we'll get right down to business with our minimum equipment list. Just a second, I got too many screens open here. So if everybody got the note, one of the things that has been a challenge for agencies, and especially our volunteer agencies with maybe one ALS ambulance, is the federal regulation where when they buy drugs, they have to buy them in lots, which is causing a lot of waste. We had a committee on it. Other than agencies working with their facilities, and I think Samaritan works pretty good with the agencies in Jefferson County, but we don't have the same thing in the other areas of the county. I think Lewis County General may as well, but it's dependent on agency and agency size. So one of the recommendations was to make sure to our agencies that they're working with the hospitals to see what type of drug exchange or purchasing options there are for the medications they need. But with skyrocketing costs of everything, including fuel, there was discussion on getting rid of the onboard ambulance supply. Most of our providers, I'm being told, and again, please, anybody jump in if this is different for their agencies, tend to work out of their first in bag. And so we kind of threw up the information, and I've asked some folks to look at their supplies. About getting rid of the onboard ambulance equipment requirement and medication requirements. They were just keeping the amount that was in their portable bag or fly car. Now, keep in mind that an agency would then be able to, if they live in a city where they do a lot of overdose calls, then if they knew based on their demographics they needed to keep more Narcan, they would be able to keep more Narcan. Again, this is a minimum equipment list. So I would entertain a discussion on that. Any thoughts out there? Somebody?
And I think it's important to note when we had this discussion that agencies know their lead time to get supplies. Agencies know their process for doing a drug exchange, and they know how long it takes them to get to their hospitals. So we're relying on good common sense of the agencies to say, yeah, that's the minimum, but I know I need more than that. And I think that's the key, is allowing the agencies to identify their needs and help with the dunnage and not have so much expired meds. I know when we went through this in 20, I think it was 20, we went through and did this. We really cut it back drastically, but this is again, a good opportunity to help the agencies carry what they need, but not over carry on the things that all they do is keep exchanging it or replacing it because it expires.
And I would add that not every hospital offers an exchange program for the medication. So when I look at the big picture region-wide, you know, it's there is no option to exchange. So they are just expiring. And then if they have to buy them by lot and don't have a lot of ambulances to fill up.
And it's Mark Tuttle. I
Yes.
agree. I think that we've advanced to a point in time where we certainly could allow agencies to be more involved in this, because it's really a fluid process depending on the specific agency and what they do, you know, particularly if you had an agency that's doing just interfacility transport. So you got agencies like Cranberry Lake that may have, you know, long transport times. And, you know, just in general, my experience has been over the last 3 decades, we EMS folks like putting, you know, 30 pounds of stuff in a 15-pound sack and always bulging at the seams and replacing zippers. And how much of that do we really need on an everyday basis?
Thank you. Any other discussion on this? So I will go through and remove the ambulance supply. The only thing I would caution is I will move to the norepinephrine. We only have one on the ambulance, so I'm just gonna move that over. So I will watch those if everybody approves this. So I'm actually gonna do a roll call vote on this because I think this is important to ensure that the docs are all on the same page with us. But I just want to, yes.
Could you just, could you just put portable / ambulance / fly car so that the agencies can decide where they want to put it? For example, like the sodium bicarb, it's so big that everybody puts it in their bags and it ends up getting, the top gets tore because of the size of it. But if we just say you have to have this total and then let the agencies decide where to put it based on what they know they use.
I'm good with that. I mean, I would hope that the agencies are thinking in terms of, you know, what they need to take to their patients. I think that was why that was there, but yes, I certainly would put that on top. Any other discussion? I have some of my operations managers out there. Mike Bennett, Fluff.
Hey, Ann.
Hi.
Hey, I've got to say I support this idea wholeheartedly. I think at the agency level is the spot to make the decision on where things belong, either portable or in the rig. I would recommend, though, that instead of just deleting that whole column from the supply list, maybe just leave the onboard as a recommendation as opposed to a requirement. So if we get some new agency administrators in who aren't familiar with their operating territory yet, they've at least got something to go by instead of just guessing.
Actually, that's a good thought. That might be an even easier fix to just say recommended but not required on that column. Thoughts on that?
I agree with Fluff on that one, and that also gives the opportunity in case we identify in a couple of years that these shortages have been rectified and maybe this becomes a need again to bring these back into place. We don't have to start over with the equipment list.
Mhm. So, any other discussion? So I would entertain a motion to make the onboard ambulance supply optional, not required.
I'll make that motion, Ann.
Okay, so I have a motion by Dr. Howland. Is there a
Nice.
second?
I second it.
Seconded by Maya. Dr. Delaney,
I agree.
Dr. Coates, uh-oh, we might have lost volume with him. Dr. Holliday,
I'm in favor.
Dr. Howland, you made the motion, sorry. Dr. Maynard, there you are. I'm looking on my screen.
Dr. Maynard, yes.
Okay, did I get everybody? Other than Dr. Coates, but it looks like we may have lost volume with it, or so. All right, motion passes. So the other new business I had is, and I think I'm throwing it up there for discussion. And I had sent out the provider credentialing manual. You know, I don't know how many years ago, 2 or 3 years, we changed it, may have been 3 now, where we're actually approving the agency to do the CME sessions, which has been going okay. After COVID, we had some trouble getting back into the swing of things. But now they seem to be better with that. But one of the things, wow, sorry, it just started like hailing outside. One of the things that we never addressed was those that don't complete their CMEs prior to the end of time and need to make them up. I've been kind of telling them that, making the agency set up a CME session or finding an agency that's credentialed to set up a CME session. Should I continue to do that, or is there another thought out there? So for example, if providers, don't complete their stuff in a timely manner, and I'll throw, Debbie, one of Debbie's providers doesn't complete their CMEs, now the agency needs to either set up a new CME session or send them elsewhere. Or do we have them go to a CIC, or do we have, there's different options out there. I'm looking for input, especially from my EMS folks out there. My crickets that are out there.
Personally, I think leaving it at the agency level keeps the agency responsible for ensuring everyone has met the expectations set.
So do we leave it with just somebody at the agency doing their CMEs, or have them set up a CME session by submitting it to our office?
And I like the idea of the sessions that have been submitted and approved, which leaves the option to be audited and inspected as well.
Okay. All right, I just thought I'd throw that out there. So that's what I have been doing. I may need to work on writing that up, and then we're probably due for a review of the manual anyway. So I'll write up the process and then submit it back for approval and continue as is right now.
Ann, are we seeing repeat offenders? You know, we added the $25 in there because, you know, it was the same names every 6 months. Are you still seeing that, or is it different people?
Well, COVID took care of that. We have it on, right? Because of so it was like the whole list started over again in June, the last time. So,
Really, I think there's only been one repeat offender if we were to look historically back, though.
yeah. Yeah, nobody was issued the fines because they have to, I don't remember the years, but isn't it twice in 3 years? So, and because we took a year off from doing CMEs, we didn't have that, you know, we haven't got that far yet. But sometimes, and we always reach out to the agencies because sometimes it's a documentation thing where they either had trouble with the system or they thought they put them in and they didn't. So I still tend to reach out to the agencies. But the big thing is, remember, this time it's the BLS provider. So that's a lot of folks. And it's just the adjuncts they lose the ability to give if they don't do their training. So. All right. That's all I had on my plate right now. Other new business on the floor.
The meeting dates, Ann?
Oh, yeah. I didn't have it on this one. To be announced. So I did send this out to everybody. This was the 2022 meeting schedule was approved at the REMSCO. So our next meeting will be February 7th. Share my screen here. This I did remember to send out, not the minutes, but I did send this out, I'm pretty sure. And we will resend again. But so February 7th will be our next meeting at 4:30. Monday, April 4th. And then there are the dates for our Spring Fling Conference. Again, if anybody's interested, including the physicians, in doing any lectures any of those days or programs, please reach out to me. June 13th and October 17th. They are taught, we don't have a state meeting schedule any longer ahead of time. So they were talking about doing state EMS meetings, which we try to follow. So if there's any item or any action items, we can take care of them. But we're talking about doing one in January, but we have no confirmation of that. Hence the reason why we went to February. But let me know if there's any concerns, but there's a schedule for next year and any other new business. Well, if that is the case, I will, this seems really funny to say, but Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, because we won't meet again before the holidays. So, and I hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving. So,
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Good night.